Hi, I'm going to create today a page using the Boutique range, which is in the 2018 Holiday Expressions. And this Boutique range is an absolute gorgeous collection with feminine, dreamy feel to it. And so I've just shown you 3 layouts that I created over the weekend. Had some friends over and we scrapbooked. Just loved getting into these papers and using them. Now I purchased the Workshops Your Way kit, which has these complements, the papers, 4 sheets of cardstock, and these are peach, peacock and 2 of the white daisy, with some puffy stickers and the mink twine. And I have already used this kit to create the 3 pages that I showed you before, so I'm just flicking through what I've got left, and I'm going to use these papers for a page in this video. So you can see just the beautiful colours that come out in this paper. It's sort of more of a soft off-white tone in a way, rather than a stark white or sharp colouring that some of the papers have. And there's 2 stamp sets that come with this, both the scrapbooking and the card making. And there's 2 other stamp sets that I just showed you there that I think I will make lots of use of, and these are watercolour impressions and stitched borders, and I think they'll feature across lots of layouts while this catalogue is in action. So from the complements, I've just pulled up the title Beautiful, and it's kind of a chipboard kind of texture, so it's not your sticker or your paper. It'll give a little bit of lift to the page. And I've also got a grey heart, and this one is just a sticker, but I quite liked the grey and how it would tie in with the title quite nicely. And having a look at the other complements here, also there's a card about moments, and so I'm going to pull that out and have a look. That's also a chipboard kind of feel, so it's got a little bit of depth and height to it when it's onto the page. So playing around with those, and the little pink one is a thin chipboard. It's not a self-adhesive already, but it's nice and thin. So having a look at the stamps that go with Boutique, I have pulled out one that I think will be quite nice to tuck onto the page as well. And having a look at the other set, there's a few ideas I have there as well, but I end up not making use of that set in this particular page. So one of the complements sheets has kind of some strips of different patterns that fit with the Boutique paper range, and I'm just trimming these off so I can layer them without the sticky element on the page to see what that looks like and how that will sit. I've sort of gone opposite way to what I normally go when I'm creating pages, in the sense that I often start with the papers and layer it up, and at the end I add on all the embellishments. But in this one I actually start playing with the embellishments before I start choosing the papers that I want to put in behind the photographs, and so just tying in the different ideas and the different aspects of the page and thinking about sort of the depth and layer I want to have. I think this is because I've chosen black and white photos, that the colour choices aren't as important in some ways as they can be when I've used colour photos, where the photos carry their own colour and theme within them. So I'm trimming off just this geometric triangle type paper, and I'm going to tuck this in behind the photographs. And when I look at this, I realise that I'm going to need to mat both of the photos, and so I'm actually going to use a white cardstock to mat them, even though the background cardstock I've used is the paler side of the linen. So the backing cardstock there is linen, not white daisy. So here's the backing process. Now I line up the photos. Sometimes I'll just cut this with scissors because it doesn't need to be perfectly neat, but I've just lined it up like that. I know that both photos are the same width, and so I'll be able to use this piece of leftover cardstock that's there for the other photo and just trim it down to the right size to fit. Now this trim is great. It's got a little guide wire, which means I can see exactly where I'm going to trim the photos, trim the cardstock, or the pattern paper, whatever I'm trimming at the time. So looking at this now here, I realise that it's going to need a little bit more colour in behind it, and I'm playing with another of the Picture My Life cards, thinking can I tuck that in, but it doesn't really fit across the page, despite adding a sense of balance with the 2 oblong shapes at either side of the photographs. So while I start with that, I don't end up going there. Now I try the paler colour and sit it there for a little bit, but it just doesn't quite sit right. And I remember when I flicked through before that there was the greeny coloured card, or the greeny coloured paper, and I decided that it just needs that little bit of darkness to help it separate from the background. So I'm going to trim that off, trim that so that it fits about the right size. And I'm just going to leave these photos on here when I do that, to see what that looks like when I trim them down. And so I'm going to use the zip strip that's there as part of the page presentation rather than cutting it off and adding it separately. It just adds another colour, another texture and another shape into the page. And what I do realise a little bit later on when I go to put this together is I'm going to actually have to put that strip at the top, otherwise the writing is upside down on this green paper. There's lots of little words on here, and even though you don't see much of it, I would know, and I decided that it just had to be the other way. So I'm just going to mat these photos. I'm using the Tombow tape runner and sticking them down onto the mats before I'm going to stick these onto that triangular geometric paper, lining up my photos, thinking about how I want them. I don't want them straight, that's just not me, so there has to be a little bit of an angle in there to make it have that more eclectic everyday look, I guess. And so this is when I realise I'm not going to be able to stick it straight down and I have to turn it around. And I actually quite like the effect that it has with that strip at the top, because I'm going to use some of those strips down the bottom as part of the page as well. So again, another couple of strips of the adhesive and sticking it down. So I'm using the mat here to line it up so that I can see that the top sort of goes across and that there's an even gap along each side. So these that I've trimmed off, there's tiny little slivers of the sticker that I had to remove before I stuck it down. And on this pink strip, you can't see it very well there, but there's just some tiny little hearts, tiny little white hearts, and then the floral, which I'm going to tuck a little bit under the photographs there, and the bluey coloured strip as well that needs a little bit of peeling off to make sure it doesn't have the extra pieces on there. And right from the start, I felt that this beautiful title would look nice with some of the other colour in behind it, so I'm going to be sticking that over top of that base strip and tying it in there. So just having a look at that card and working out the best way to stick it down, and I end up deciding to use the tape runner on this as well, despite having used the pen on the beautiful word. It was just the finer tip. It needed that more detailed sticking when I go to stick that down. Okay, so thinking about those hearts, and so here I'm going to pull out our glue pen and just going over these. Now this pen's quite cool. It goes on blue, and as it dries it becomes white, so it can be a semi-permanent adhesive if you let it dry first, but I wanted it to be permanent, so I wanted to try and do this as quickly as possible so that the word will stick down. So just added a bit of pressure there to stick it onto the page. So now's the opportunity just to add a few extra bits and pieces, making use of my stamps and deciding finally where the journaling's going to go, as well as wanted sort of an element of stitching along just where that pink strip is. It feels like it's kind of on its own a wee bit and it needs something else up there. So grabbing my acrylic blocks and putting the words on there that I looked at the start from one of the stamp sets. And so I just used the archival black ink here for that particular piece, and I'm going to use the charcoal ink next for some bits along the top up there. I just didn't want it to have the same intensity as the other text down below. And because the stamp is longer than my ink pad, I put the stamp onto the acrylic rather than the other way around. So it just adds a little bit of texture up there with the pink strip. So now I'm thinking through my journaling side of things, and there's also a little leaf that I decided would look quite nice to add more balance because I've got the text over the other side. I wanted something else just over to the left there as well. So having a think about the top, and I wanted to tie in some of the linen onto this page, just a little bit more texture, a little bit more lift, and I've decided to follow the theme of You Make Me Happy, and I'm going to just add 3 X's, as in kiss kiss kiss, along the top. So this photo is of both of my daughters after school one day. I normally meet one of them and pick her up and take her home, but it's not very often that both of them meet up with me. So I just pierced some holes in the top, made enough to be able to do 3 little crosses, and when I was actually stitching them I realized I wanted to make sure that the each of the crosses went across the same way. So just tucking that underneath, and I'll probably tape that up a little bit later on to make sure it's going to be there for many years to come. So just adding those wee crosses there. Now these puffy stickers are pretty cool, and I was also able to tie in the crosses up on my pink strip. Again, kiss kiss kiss, and balancing that across. Now I added another one down the bottom because in design you often talk about grouping things in 3s. So while I've got 3 crosses that I've stitched, 3 of the stickers, then I added another an area where I put 1 more cross on its own in the 3rd setting. So now I'm looking at adding in a bit of a journaling block down the bottom, and I've decided to use the Blossom ink. It looks quite different on the ink pad than it does on the actual page, and after stamping it on I realized the pink was probably a bit darker than I would have anticipated, so I decided to balance that up slightly off center at the top as well. So in the bottom part there I'm going to add my journaling down on the lower pink piece, and I'm just going to add a little cross at the top where that piece is. Thanks for watching.